Hey guys, it's Dr. Dost. Welcome back to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. Glad you're here for this series on the textual analysis of the book of Daniel. And today we're going to be covering Daniel chapter 1 and verse 2. We'll be parsing some Hebrew forms, looking maybe at a little bit of Masorah, wherever the text takes us. So before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell to be notified. You know the drill here. I would appreciate it if you'd hit the like button below, and please share the URL for this video with any friends that you think would be interested in the channel. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the Hebrew text of Daniel. Okay, so let's read through the Hebrew text. All right, Daniel 1:2. ויתן אדוני בידו את יהויקים מלך יהודה ומקצת כלי בית האלוהים ויביאם ארץ שינה בית אלוהיו ואת הכלים הביא בית אוצר אלוהיו. All right, now let's read it a little bit slower. And I'll point to the words as we go through them. ויתן אדוני בידו את יהויקים מלך יהודה ומקצת כלי בית האלוהים ויביאם ארץ שינה בית אלוהיו ואת הכלים הביא בית אוצר אלוהיו. And one more time fast. ויתן אדוני בידו את יהויקים מלך יהודה ומקצת כלי בית האלוהים ויביאם ארץ שינה בית אלוהיו ואת הכלים הביא בית אוצר אלוהיו. Okay, so let's start by analyzing the text word by word here. So the first word we have is vayeten, and vayeten comes from the root nun tav nun, and it is in the kal stem, binyan kal, or some more standard nomenclature is the G stem. So depending on which resources you use, which grammars you use, you could call it the kal, that's the more traditional, or you can call it the G stem, either one. So I tend to use G stem because that's what's used in the comprehensive Aramaic lexicon, and a lot of other Semitic language grammars will use this nomenclature as well, but whatever you use, that's fine. So vayetain is a third masculine singular prefix conjugation, okay? And I like to use the term prefix conjugation as opposed to yiktol or something like that, because it is just a more apt description of the forms in Hebrew, and it avoids a lot of connotations and assumptions about these words. So this is a prefix conjugation of nun tav nun. When we add the prefix, the nun assimilates, and that's why you have a tav. The tav has a dagesh in it, and so that's what happens to the first nun. It assimilates into the tav. And of course, vayetain, we have a dagesh in the yud because it is a vav consecutive. And so yetain would mean he will give or he gives. Vayetain means now he gave. Now, if you want to follow along in the Leningrad Codex, you can do so here. So Daniel 1:2, I'm going to zoom in. Okay, and I'll just do this one word at a time because I realize if you don't have any experience with the manuscripts, it's a little hard to read. But you can just pause the recording if you want to, make out the word there. There's your vav, va. There's the yud. Notice how close in the manuscript that a yud is to a vav. There are times where it becomes very confusing. Like down here, you can see a yud, right, and a vav there, and there's a difference in length, but sometimes not a whole lot. But we got va, ye, you can see the dagesh there. Here's your tav with the dagesh in it, vayete, and there is your final nun with the accent mark above it, vayetain. Okay, so vayetain Adonai. Vayeten Adonai. Now, I want to point out here that this word Adonai means Lord, but typically in the Hebrew Bible, we get the tetragrammaton Yud He Vav He, which actually spells out God's personal name, but it's pronounced, it's pronounced Adonai because of a Jewish tradition that dates to the 3rd century, or about the 3rd century, where Adonai, the generic word for Lord, came to be read in the place of God's actual name. I actually discuss evidence for this in my book, The Subloco Notes and the Former Prophets of Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. And I don't have the page number to hand because I'm recording this in my classroom and not in my office. But there is a footnote in one of the Masoretic notes that deals with that very issue, in which I comment on the approximate date of the origin of reading Adonai, the word for Lord, in place of the name of God. And it's about the 3rd century BC based on available evidence. So we translate these together. Vayeten Adonai. Now the Lord gave, verb followed by the subject. Biado, into his hand. Ba means into, in this case. Yad means hand, and O is the 3rd masculine singular pronominal suffix. The 3rd masculine singular pronominal suffix, into his hand. Now the Lord gave into his hand, and now et signifies a definite direct object. Not just a direct object, but a definite direct object. For those who speak Spanish, this is somewhat akin, not exactly, but somewhat akin to the way a is used for personal direct objects in Spanish. So if you are a Spanish speaker, this will make sense to you. If you don't speak Spanish well, don't worry about it. Okay? They're not identical, but they are roughly akin to one another. So, Vayeten Adonai biado et Yehoiakim. So the Lord gave Jehoiakim into his hand. Into his hand. Now, into whose hand? Well, we go back to verse 1 here, and we saw in verse 1, we did this in the last video, Bishnat Shlosh Malchut Yehoiakim, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, Melech Yehuda, the king of Judah, Ba Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. The Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, right? Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, Vayatza Alea, and he besieged it. So we're talking here, the O, the pronoun O, pronominal suffix O, I should say, refers back to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, it has an anaphoric reference. That means it refers to something that precedes, as opposed to cataphoric, which would be something that follows. Okay, so now the Lord gave into his hand, that is into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, Jehoiakim Melech Yehuda, the king of Judah. The king of Judah. Okay, and then we have Umiktsat Kilei, and literally it would be, and from, and we're going to translate Kitsat here as some. Now you can see in the lexicon, whoop, that's not the right reference. I think I must have scrolled through before here. Let's go back to the right reference. There we go. So in the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon, okay, so Kitsat has a number of translations throughout the Hebrew Bible. A lot of times it means end or extremity, but you see here, miktsat can mean at the end of. We're going to see that in Daniel 1:5, Daniel 1:15, and so on. But it also means a part of or some of, as in Daniel 1:2 and Nehemiah 7:69. Nehemiah 7:69. In fact, why don't we just take a little detour over to Nehemiah. Okay, and so Nehemiah 7:65, you can see it begins with or 7:69. Need more coffee. Oops. Okay, now Nehemiah 7:69, chapter 7, verse 69, which will be chapter 7 and verse 70 in your English translation probably. And here we read Umiktsat Rashi Ha'avot, which means now some of the heads of the fathers, or some of the heads of the fathers' houses, Natnu Lamlacha, which means they gave to the work. They gave to the work. And so umiktsat here means now some of, referring to people. And so now we go back to Daniel. Okay, Vayiten Adonai biado et Yoakim melech Yehuda, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. Umiktsat kle veta Elohim, and some of the vessels of, we've got a plural construct here. From the word kli, it becomes kle in the plural construct. Umiktsat kle veta Elohim, and some of the vessels of the house of God. And some of the vessels of the house of God, okay, which would be the temple. House of God is, you could translate it as temple if you'd like to. Okay? And then it continues by saying, Vayviem eret shinar, and he brought them, Vayviem. So here we've got the root Beit Vav Aleph, Beit Vav Aleph, but you can see the Yud here, which indicates that we are in the Hifil. Okay, we've got a Yud prefix, so we're in the prefix conjugation. We're in the Hifil, or the C stem, or H stem, however you want to call it. Okay, and so when you put Beit Vav Aleph into the C stem or the H stem, it's not going to mean to come, it's going to mean to bring. But we've got the Vav consecutive, and he brought, not and he will bring, and he brought them. Masculine plural, third person masculine plural, pronominal suffix, referring back to clay. And he brought them. What did he bring? The vessels. And he brought them, Eretz Shinar, to the land of, well, I guess in English we say Shinar. Okay? Beit Elohav. We're going to read this as into the beit. Sometimes when you have the word beit and the preposition ba is implied, it will just drop out in Hebrew. Okay, so instead of beveit, we get beit. Into the house of his God, into his temple. Okay, into his temple. Okay, and the av, of course, is the third person masculine singular pronominal suffix on a plural noun. That's the aleph and the silent yud there. So, into the house of his God. It could be read into the house of his gods, but more likely, I think we should translate this as singular, his patron god. And that would be Marduk. All right, now let's go back to the manuscript for a minute, just so you have the opportunity to read along here, because we only did the first word, as I recall. So let's zoom in a little bit, just to make it a little easier for you. Okay, and so here we are at the beginning of Daniel 1:2. Notice that there are no verse numbers in the Hebrew manuscript here, right? Because that is a later invention, or a later addition. So we have Vayiten, and then we get the word Adonai. Vayiten Adonai. Notice that there's a cercilis over that, a small circle, and that's going to refer us back to a Masoretic note here, which says 11 times. So with the dots above, Yud Aleph, Yud means 10, Aleph means 1, so together this is 11. Yud Aleph, 11 times. Okay. Kaf Tav, an abbreviation for Ktiv, written, 11 times written Ken, Kaf Nun, written so, written in this manner. Okay. Basifra, which would be in this book, in the book of Daniel, presumably. All right, so we need to pause for a second before we read anything more. So we can go over to the Dotan Reich Masorah Thesaurus, which I regularly reference in my my work on the Subloco notes in the former prophets. And here we see Daniel chapter 1, verse 2. Aleph is for chapter 1, the Beit is for verse 2, Daniel 1:2. And we can see that the entry here is the word Adonai. And so Dotan Reich put they enter the Masoretic note as it appears in the manuscript 11 times, 11 times written thus in this book. And so what are those 11 times? Well, we see here that the first one is obviously Daniel 1:2. And then the second one, Daniel. Now let's see how you do with your Hebrew numbers, right? So Daniel, what does the tet mean? Chapter 9, ninth letter of the alphabet, right? Chapter 9, verse Gimel, 3. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, right? So Daniel 9:3, and then the two dashes or hyphens here just means it's still Daniel, right? Daniel 9:4, Dalet, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. So Daniel chapter 9 and verse 4. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 7. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 9. So we're seeing a lot in Daniel 9 with this word Adonai. And then there in verse 5, they note that it's not the exact form, it's Ladonai, so with the preposition. And then we get Daniel 9, and now here's a tricky one for you, Tet Vav. What number is Tet Vav in Hebrew? Well, Tet is 9, Vav is 6, 9 and 6 is 15. So you may be asking, well, why wouldn't you write Yud He, 10-5, right? And the reason is because that looks like an abbreviation for the tetragram. So Tet Vav is used instead. So Daniel 9:15, and then Daniel 9 Tet Zayin 9:7. That makes 16. Because again, the other way to write 16 would be Yud Vav, and again, looks like an abbreviation for the tetragram. Okay, and then we go to the eighth one. Okay, which is going to be 9:17. We go back to the using the Yud again with 17. Daniel 9:17. Okay, and then we get Daniel 9:19, the first instance, okay? So you will see if you go to Daniel 9:19 that there is more than one instance there. So this is the first instance, and then this is a typo here. This should be 9:19, not 19:9. So that's a typo. And then this should be 9:19 third occurrence. 9:19 third occurrence. And that adds up to 11. Just to verify what I'm saying about Daniel 9:19, that Dotan Reich has a typo there. If you look at Daniel 9:19, we've got Adonai, Adonai, and then the third instance occurs right at the end here, Adonai. Notice that all of these forms lack the vav. Okay, you could have a vav for the O vowel. The vav is a vowel letter. It's not there. The Masorah notes this. Adonai without the vav 11 times in the book of Daniel. All right, so going back to the manuscript, let me zoom out a little here. All right, so we have Vayiten Adonai, and the Lord gave, right? And the Lord gave into his hand biado et, right? And there we have some spacers. Yehoiakim, Melech Yehuda, Jehoiakim, king of Judah, umiktzat kle vet haElohim, and some of the vessels of the house of God. Okay, and then we had finished before with, we had the rest of the verse here. Vayviem eret Shinar, Beit Elohav. Now careful, that looks kind of like a hey there, but it's a Yud and a Vav. Okay, and then Ve'et Hakelim Hevi Beit Otzah Elohav, and there is the Sof Pasuk, the end of the verse. Okay, so there, you've read Daniel 1:2 in the Leningrad Codex. Now we do have one other Masoretic note here. Okay, you'll notice that there is a Cercillus here. Okay, and it comes right in between Vet HaElohim, and there is a number 5, or the letter He, which indicates the number 5. So let's go find out what is meant by this note 5. Now, even if you can't read modern Hebrew, you can see here in the Dotan Reich Thesaurus that there's a problem. okay, which requires explanation. And what is noted here at the end is that there are actually 5 instances in the Bible of this phrase, but only if you include the word klei at the beginning. And so we can see that by doing a search, okay? We'll go over and do a little search here, and you can see here, let me zoom in. The first one is Daniel 1:2. Next we have Nehemiah 13:9. The next one is 2 Chronicles 28:24, where it occurs twice, and then 2 Chronicles 36:18, where it occurs the 5th time. But the phrase Beit Elohim occurs far more than that, as Dotan and Reich note. You can see, however, though, that the phrase Beit Elohim occurs far more than 5 times, right? So Judges 18:31, Ecclesiastes 4:17, Daniel 1:2, Ezra 1:4, and so on and so forth. Okay, and just one after the other after the other. Okay, and you can do that with a simple accordance search. Okay, and I think this totals 45 verses, if I remember correctly, when you exclude, some of the forms that have prefixes, but I'd have to check that. Anywho, all right, there you go. So when we go back to this Masorah note in the manuscript, or in, let's bring up Dotan Reich, right? Masorah Thesaurus, okay? It would appear that this note He actually means Klei Vet HaElohim, and the evidence comes from the Aleppo Codex, okay, in addition to just searching for it, of course. But the Aleppo Codex, if we look at its Masorah Parva, that's what that sign means there, and we go to Divrei Hayamim, that's Chronicles, that's how we say it in Hebrew, Divrei Hayamim Beit, 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verse 18. Now, there is one other note that warrants consideration, and that is there's a Masorah Magna note in Daniel 1:2, and it is for et hakelim, et hakelim. So I want to go over to the manuscript. And you'll notice here, toward the end, ve'et hakelim, there's a Masorah Parva note, and this is a gimel. I know that's probably hard to tell if you're not used to reading the manuscripts. 3 times. Now, there's nothing to indicate that there's a Masorah Magna list for this, but if we look at the top, and we always want to do that, we want to look at the top and the bottom margins, and at the bottom of the page, if we look at the Masorah Magna there, let's zoom in a little, what we will see is that there is a list right here after the divider. Whoops, sorry, wrong place. And what we will see after this divider right here is ve'et hakelim 3 times, and then we get the catchphrases for it. And these catchphrases come right from the 3 verses, and Dotan and Reich tell us that they represent 1 Kings 7:51, so Nun is 50, and Aleph is 1, so chapter 7, verse 51 of 1 Kings. Okay, and then we get Ezra 8, that's the Chet, it means 8. 25, Ezra 8:25, and then here, Daniel 1:2, the 3 occurrences of the Et Hakelim. Now, since we've already gone overtime with this video, next time we will get into some of the chronological issues concerning Jehoiakim and his purported besiegement of Jerusalem, but for today, that is going to have to do. All right, so if you have any questions, please leave them in the discussion, post them below, I should say. And, we'll see you next time in our next video for Daniel chapter 1 and verse 3. All right, everybody. Ciao, ciao.